In this video, we're going to review additional two ratios, and they are profit margin and current ratio. We already learned a ratio called return on assets, which describes companies' operating results, companies' profitability. Well, the profit margin is another ratio that measures companies' operating results, and it equals the profit margin is determined as net income over net assets. I'm sorry, net sales. Okay, so it's not return on assets, it's profit margin ratio. Again, determined as net income over net sales. This ratio basically reflects the percent of profit that we have in each dollar of sales. The other ratio is a current ratio, and this ratio is determined as our current assets divided by current liabilities. And this ratio reflects company's ability to meet its current obligations using current assets. So now we can go ahead and work on the problem which is beyond the numbers, number 2 in chapter 3. So this is the problem beyond the numbers, 3, 2. In this problem, we have two companies, Polaris and Arctic Cat, and we are asked, and we're given net income, net sales, current assets and current liabilities for 2 years, the current year and the prior year for both companies. In step 1, we are asked to determine profit margin for each company for the 2 years. So we're going to start with Polaris, and we're going to determine the profit margin for current year. So we have for Polaris, for current year, we have net income of $227,575 divided by net sales of $2,656,949. This gives us profit margin of 8.6%. The profit margin for prior year for Polaris is determined by taking $147,138 in net income and dividing it by 1,991,139 in net sales, and that gives us 7.4%. We will calculate the same ratios for Arctic Cat company. So the profit margin for current year for Arctic Cat is $13,007 in net income over $636,015 in net sales, gives us 3.6%. And the profit margin for prior year, $1,875 in net income over $350,871 in net sales, which gives us 0.6%. So if you compare the two companies' profit margin for current and prior year, you will find that the current year's profit margin for Arctic Cat is lower than the profit margin for the same year for Polaris. The same thing with the prior year. The profit margin for Arctic Cat in prior year was 0.6%, which is lower than 7.4% for Polaris in the prior year. So the operating performance of Polaris is better than Arctic Cat. However, if you analyze these two ratios for both companies and how it changes from year to year, you will find that for Arctic Cat, the profit margin went up from 0.6%, improved to 3.6%, from 0.6% to 3.6%, and for Polaris, it increased from 7.4% to 8.6%. So again, both companies are improving their operating performance, their profit margin. So our next step is to determine current ratios for both current and prior years for Polaris and Arctic Cat. So this is step number 3. We're going to start with Polaris. The current ratio for current year for Polaris is determined by taking 878,676 in current assets and dividing it by 615,531 in current liabilities. So for current year, the current ratio is 1.43. For prior year, this ratio for Polaris is 808,145 in current assets divided by 584,210 in current liabilities, which gets us to 1.38. We will determine the same current ratios for Arctic Cat. Okay. Current ratio for current year for Arctic Cat is taken $232,040 in current assets and divided it by current liabilities of 87,444. That gives us 2.65. And the current ratio for prior year for Arctic Cat is the current assets of 201,015 over 75,320 gives us 2.67. Now again, when we compare the current ratios of both companies for current year and then the same companies for prior year, we find that the current ratio for Arctic Cat, which is 2.65 for current year, is greater than the current ratio for Polaris for the same year of 1.43. The same thing with the prior year. The prior year's current ratio for Arctic Cat is also greater, it's 2.67, than the current ratio for the same year for Polaris, which is 1.38. Now, when looking at the changes, when analyzing the changes from year to year, we find that the current ratio for Polaris rises from 1.38 to 1.43, which means the company is improving its ability to pay current liabilities using current assets. And Arctic Cat's ratio remains pretty much the same. It changes, it slides just slightly from 2.67 to 2.65. Now, the important thing to notice here, but that neither companies are in danger of defaulting on their current obligations, because both current ratios for both companies and both years are above 1, which tells us that for both companies in both years, current assets are greater than current liabilities, which is an important thing to know when analyzing the company's ability to meet its current obligations. The last question we need to answer is, how do Polaris and Arctic Cats, that's a step number 6, current ratios compare to their industry? Assuming that for industry the average ratio is 2.4. Now when you look at Polaris's current ratios, both ratios for current and prior years are below the industry average of 2.4, and Arctic cats are above the industry average of 2.4. But again, the important thing to know here that neither company are in immediate danger of defaulting or not being able to pay their current obligations.